The new year has given India a new Chief of Defence Staff. General Bipin Rawat of the Indian Army has taken over as the Chief of Indian Defence Staff on January 1st, which is described by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi as a very significant step in the advancement of the defence capabilities of Indian armed forces. The Prime Minister has described this major development as a very important step in the modernization of the Indian armed forces, which of course was a step that he had announced many months back on August 15th in his speech from Red Fort. In that speech, he had announced that India will have a new position of the Chief of Defence Staff over and above the positions of the Chief of Army Staff, the Chief of Naval Staff and the Chief of Air Force. So all these three forces will be coming under the new command of the Chief of Defence Staff, who will be reporting to the Defence Minister of India. But when we are looking at the new development of the defence forces, we are also concerned about these new significant movements, because India is facing huge civilian unrest in the country today. 2019 was the year which has seen large number of cities exploding with civilian unrest, civilian protests, student agitations. Now 2020 has arrived, and this year is going to be the year when most sections of the Indian people will be coming out into the street protesting against the various actions of the government. So what is going to happen is that the Indian military forces, Indian defence forces, especially the army, will be forced to take over more and more civilian role, more and more role in the pacification or in suppressing the civilian unrest in various parts of the country, from Kashmir to northeastern states. The army is already on the streets. Wherever civilian unrest happens, wherever violence erupts, the army is forced to step in and take action against the public. So naturally, the role of the army in the civilian affairs is getting more and more exposed. It is becoming much bigger. So that creates a problem for the Indian defence forces, because the major role of the Indian defence forces is to protect the India's border, to protect the country from external aggression. But instead, its role is becoming much more political, much more internal, much more against the people of India, not against the enemies from outside. So that poses problems for the army as well as the Indian society. For the army, of course, it is a totally unprofessional thing to do, suppressing and fighting the citizens of that country that they are supposed to defend. And secondly, at a time when the country's politics is going into a very serious confrontationist road, political confrontation becomes the major issue of the day, when army becomes a kind of a football between the politicians in the opposition and the ruling class. That will also erode the credibility of the armed forces. So when we are having a Chief of Defence Staff in such a situation, we have to very seriously consider what exactly will be the role played by the new general, the 4-star general. He is supposed to actually coordinate the activities of the three defence forces, do essential planning for the future development of the army and other forces, think about the defence procurement of weapons and other things, and plan for the future and be the principal advisor to the defense minister on defense matters. These are all good and acceptable role for a defense staff. But why such a defense position had to be planned? Because in the 70 years of Indian history, we have never had such a role. We have never had such a position, because all the three defense heads, Army, Navy and Air Force, all these heads of the various forces were reporting directly to the defense minister, and their coordination was actually being conducted by, planned by, organized by civilian authorities at the defense ministry. Now, instead of the civilian authorities, the coordination and planning will go into the military itself. That creates very serious problems of direct involvement of the army and defense forces in India's defense planning. So the civilian role gets eroded and the military role gets much more important. But of course, there is a history to this development, that in 1999, when Kargil war happened, there were accusations from the defense experts that there was very serious problems caused by the lack of coordination between the armed forces, the army, the activities of the army and the activities of the other forces, especially the flying forces, Air Force. So in order to iron out these problems, a committee was appointed by Prime Minister Vajpayee at that time under defense expert K. Subramaniam, who happens to be the father of the present Foreign Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar. The Subramanian committee had recommended that we should have a new position of the Chief of Defense Staff in order to do the planning as well as coordination activities while we are in armed conflict with external forces. So that is why such a position had been announced by Prime Minister in August last. But when this position is being actually filled up by the present government, there are a number of criticisms happening about it. One is it the right kind of policy to actually implement in a country like India? Is it the right way to carry on the military activities, plan the military activities in a democratic country like India? Why the Indian authorities, Indian government in the last 70 years had refused to actually bring about this kind of a coordination? Why did they insist that the chiefs of army, the chief of navy, the chief of air force, all the three chiefs should directly report to the defense minister and not in between them? Because they wanted to ensure the civilian authority at the armed forces. Because they wanted to avoid even the slightest possibility of an army takeover in a situation of crisis. The takeover of the country by army and other military forces is a reality. Not in India, of course, but in various other foreign countries, especially in our neighborhood, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar. In all these countries, our history proves that military did step into the administration at various phases in their history and has created lots of problems for those countries. This is not an Asian phenomenon. This has happened in Latin America and Chile. This has happened in Africa, in countries like Uganda. So there has always been a very clear, cautious approach on the part of the government as well as the civilian authorities, including the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, that all these three forces should directly report to the defense minister and not in between. But that history is being diverted, that is being changed in a drastic manner right now, and a new defense head is coming into the picture. And what's of a defense chief is General Bipin Rawat. This chief of army staff, he had taken over as Chief of Army Staff 3 years ago in 2016, bypassing 2 other senior officers. He was handpicked by Prime Minister Narendra Modi because he wanted the army chief to have 3 complete years as chief of the armed forces. That's a good thing. But in the 3 years, General Bipin Rawat had made a number of political statements about developments in Kashmir, developments in various other parts of the country, issues like the agitations, student agitations on NRC, issues like the agitations on the Citizenship Amendment Act. All these are political issues. So the defense chief continuously making political statements defending the political party at the center, the ruling party at the center, is not a very auspicious kind of situation for a country. It always shows that there is an unnecessary and very unhealthy contact between the civilian authorities and military at various levels, which actually erodes the credibility of the armed forces, which actually gives reason to suspect that army will be misused when civilian unrest happens. Army will be misused against opposition politicians, which is a real possibility in the coming days. And secondly, the new army chief of defense staff had taken very clear political positions in defense of the Prime Minister and the Home Minister just days before, when his position was being finalized, when the government was considering at the final stage whom to be appointed. Rawat made a very clear statement in order to please these political masters, which has created a big controversy. The former Defence Minister P. Chidambaram said the army chief should mind his own business, not the political affairs. Politics is not his cup of tea. Army should completely cut itself away from the political situation in the country. That is a civilian matter. And many others also, like Asaduddin Owaisi of MIM, many other politicians have criticized the army chief about the unnecessary and even provocative statements he had made in the recent days. All this shows that in the next 3 years, the activities of General Bipin Rawat as the Chief of Defence Staff will be very keenly looked by the civil society and the media in the coming days, because his activities might create problems for India in the coming days. If the army chief, if the defense chief is becoming a kind of a political tool in the hands of the ruling classes, that could create problem for the armed forces as well as the country. Of course, the first statement made by General Bipin Rawat after taking over his new position is that army is completely apolitical. Army will not have anything to do with the political affairs in the country. We will completely control by our own ethical standard. That is what he has said. But the past experience in the country, not only with General Bipin Rawat, but also people like V.K. Singh, the former General of Indian Army, shows that if you are actually indulging in politics while you are in uniform, you get rewarded. And that is a very unhealthy, unprofessional thing for the armed forces as well as the country. Thank you.